Welcome to the Great Relearning. I am Dr. Rob Williams, your host. Thanks to the Marion Institute for supporting this podcast. And with us today, all the way from over the pond, is Mark Booth, the author of The Secret History of the World. Mark, welcome.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me onto your show.
It's so good to have you. And I just want to read from the back summary of this book, because there's so much in here. The summary reads this: from mystic revelations to esoteric codes, here for the first time is a history of the world based upon the beliefs of the secret societies, a radical reinterpretation of human existence, and a view of the world previously hidden from us. So the Great Relearning podcast, Mark, as you know, is really, it's a show. It's a series of conversations about three big questions regarding Team Human, the human species, Homo sapiens: who we are, where we've been, and where we might be going.
Okay.
So I wanted to start with this question: why, and it's in red letters here on the book, why the secret history of the world?
Well, I suppose it's secret because in this account of history, this account really comes from, it originated in the mystery schools of the ancient world, and these were places where members of the artistic, political, even sometimes military elite were initiated into secret knowledge and higher consciousness. And then in the time of the Emperor Augustus, they were closed down. The mystery schools were closed down across the world, and this was partly because Augustus was an initiate himself, and so he knew that of a prophecy that the sun god was returning to Earth to start a new dispensation, and he knew he wasn't that guy. So he didn't want word of this to get out, which is why he closed the mystery schools down.
So he shut down these mystery schools to protect his own power and legacy, in other words.
Yeah, the power of the Caesars. And so what happened then is that the priests who ran the mystery schools, they went rogue. They went further underground, and that's what gave rise to the secret societies. And obviously they were unpopular with the Caesars. They were also unpopular with the church because the views that they were teaching were heretical, according to the church. And also the church very much wanted to keep a control on access to the spiritual, which is, a topic we could come back to later. But we know from history that, these groups surface from time to time. For example, the Cathars and the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. I mean, in the early days, there's a kind of umbrella term called the Gnostics, which is almost so widespread that it's not useful. But what are sometimes called Gnostic Gospels have come down to us, which expound some of these secret teachings.
Yes, and within the Christian tradition, these Gnostic, Gnostic, these Gnostic Gospels were essentially stories about Jesus that were not sanctioned by the official authorities. They weren't legitimated. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. And they tended to be more intensely mystical. I mean, I think that biblical scholars would agree that St. John's Gospel is quite Gnostic in tone.
Yes, of the
But
four that made it into the New Testament. Yeah.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah. I
And
just
then,
wanted, oh, go ahead.
look, and then you say, I mean, that's the historic account of how it comes to be secret. But another aspect of this is that these teachings are secret because they're dangerous. I think
Ah,
they are to idealism what theoretical physics is to materialist science.
oh,
And
we'll have to come back around to that.
and uh, and in the same way they're open to abuse. So you
Hmm.
know, I don't know if you've seen that the great Oppenheimer movie, but it's a masterpiece, and you know that just shows how why sometimes it's good to keep stuff secret.
Yes, this is director Christopher Nolan's new
Yeah.
3-hour epic based on the book American Prometheus. Yeah, back in around the same time that you wrote this book, actually. I wanted just to because we're talking about the secret history of the world here and
Mm.
these mystery schools. Um, Again, the back of the book is helpful in that it gives names to these mystery schools,
Mm.
many of which I had heard of as a historian by training for 30
Yeah.
years, but didn't know much about, which is why I found your book so intriguing. We're talking about alchemists and alchemy, Freemasons, the Illuminati, the Knights Templar, the Green King, the Neolithic Alexander, Gnostics, as you just mentioned, and shamans, the rise of the Magi, Francis Bacon and the Green One. You mentioned them a moment ago, the Rosicrucians, the
Yeah.
Seven Seals and the New Jerusalem. I mean, this is just a stunning sort of historical tour de force of this secret history of the world humans have been involved with for millennia without us really, most of us really even knowing, let alone understanding what was going on here. Can you say something about, you use this word initiates a couple
Yes.
of times. What does it mean to be an initiate into
Well,
these?
can I climb into that by saying something
Please.
about the mystery schools?
Yes.
Because I think very broadly there are two types of secret society. There are secret societies, say like the Freemasons, where we all know they exist, we all know where they hang out,
Yes.
but we don't know what they're doing in there. And then you know, the Knights Templar would be another example of that. And then there are other types of secret societies where we may not even know of their existence. We may have a rumor of it, like the Rosicrucian Brotherhood or the Saramon Brotherhood that Gurdjieff wrote about, and they may be among us. We may be bumping into them day by day, but we don't know who they are. We don't know where they hang out. So there are two different types of secret society, and the mystery schools are very much of the first type, because in the ancient world you had the great public temples, many of which survive, and then you have these mystery centers or mystery schools to which only the elite were admitted, and they were very secretive. To try to break into one of these enclosures would be punishable by death. If you were initiated, I'll describe that process in a moment, and then if you told people about it afterwards, that was punishable by death. So inevitably, what we know about them is a little patchy. But many of the great figures, particularly in Greek and Roman society, were initiates. Plato, Aristotle, the poet Pindar, Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, the Roman statesman Cicero, many of the Caesars, and some of them have left behind hints. What all the hints seem to agree on is that when you completed this initiation process, you knew without a shadow of a doubt what was going to happen to you after death, because you had experienced it. You would, in this process of initiation, in some sense, die and be reborn. And so what happened is that the candidates for initiation would have a long training period. They would be taken to live in isolation. They would be given instruction. They would engage in spiritual exercises. They would fast for long periods. And in some accounts, they were given drinks which may have contained hallucinogenic substances. So they were being prepared to receive some pretty amazing ideas, and also put into a state where they might achieve what we today would call altered states of consciousness, or a higher state of consciousness. So this might go on for some time. In the case of the people initiated by Pythagoras, it was the very ancient Greek philosopher. People were being prepared for years before the actual initiation, and then on the day of initiation, they would be stripped of their clothes. They would be rubbed in a holy oil. They would actually be given a simple white tunic, and then they would be led underground by the priests. And we know from depictions of initiation in Egyptian temples that sometimes these priests would be wearing animal masks. So you would be led down these very dark, narrow passageways by the priests, and it might go on for miles. And you might reach an underground river, and you might have to hand over a token to a ferryman who would row you across. You might find yourself, you would undergo certain tests. You might find yourself menaced by monsters. You might suddenly find yourself falling down a chute into a nest of snakes. You would be led further and further underground. You would reach a chamber where sacrifices of animals were performed in what was probably a very small space. So it would have been very frightening. It would have been very loud. The smells would have been almost overwhelming. And then you would be led to another chamber where you would be in total darkness. You would be left in total darkness. And imagine how frightened you must be at that point. And then certainly in some of the initiation ceremonies, you received a sudden blow to the forehead, which would knock you over.
Wow.
And that's when you thought you were going to die.
Yeah, and this is all in the service, as you said, and I'm putting on my Christianity hat for a moment, of being born again, of being ceremonially dead and then reborn. Is that
Yes, that's right. That's right. You were in a sense dying to the world at that moment in that completely dark room.
Yeah.
And then you would see a light, and you would be led upwards again, and you would be led into a light-filled chamber. And in that chamber, people believed they were meeting the gods. Now, Cicero, the Roman statesman we mentioned earlier, said that all the great things that came out of Athens came from the mystery centers. And that includes the statuary. The statues of gods were made in the mystery centers so that the spirits of gods could inhabit them. And even in the public temples, the statues of the gods were thought to sometimes speak, because they were created as a body, like a physical body for God to inhabit.
Yeah.
Also, drama. All the drama we enjoy today on stage, and film, and television, that comes from these mystery centers. And the earliest examples we have are by playwrights like Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides, who were initiates. And I think probably what was happening is that there was a kind of immersive performance that the candidate would find himself taking part in this play, surrounded by what he believed were divine beings. And this was an experience as a vision of the afterlife. The candidate was being told what would happen to him. And then a very interesting thing happened, because at the end of the performance, everyone clapped. And they clapped as a way of driving away evil spirits. And that is why we clap in the theatre, and that's why we don't clap in church, because we don't want the spirits to go away.
Wow. So clapping is a form of sort of breaking the spell, if you would, and driving the spirits away. So, so the secret history of the world, as you just so beautifully described it here, it seems to me is about sort of conspiring, breathing together to inspire, to breathe new life into human intention, purpose, and being. And these initiates, and in your book, so many names of so many well-known historical figures who, as you just gave us a few, were involved in these mystery schools. And so these initiates who come out of these schools are leaving behind these powerful team human legacies. It seems to me, in a way, to sort of optimize us as a species, to sort of call us perhaps to a higher or more noble purpose. Is that, am I stretching?
Yes, absolutely it is, because in this view of the universe and how it works, it's a universe which is full of mind, which is meant to be, and it is meant to have a purpose. And the priests who ran these mystery schools were inculcating in the initiates who were to lead society, who were to lead their society, the direction in which they were supposed to go. And it was all based on a very grand scheme of what the purpose of the universe is meant to be, and the stages it is intended to go through. And that is the heart of the philosophy of idealism, which underlines both the mystery schools and the secret societies I'm writing about.
Yes, and this is perhaps, Mark, one of the most important themes of your entire book, The Secret History of the World, is this the relationship between mind and matter, which I
Yes.
hadn't really fully appreciated until immersing myself in your work. And idealism, you just use this term.
Mhm.
Can you explain what's going on here with mind and matter and
Yeah.
why it matters?
Yeah. It I think idealism is a difficult word because it can mean something else. It can mean aspiring to high ideals, but um, but the way I'm using it here, it's I call it a mind before matter philosophy and account of the universe. And I think probably the easiest way into it is to remember the biblical account of creation, where God says, "Let there be light."
Mm.
And so here you have a divine cosmic mind beginning the process of the creation of the material universe. In Indian religion, the great cosmic mind is called Brahman. And in all religions, the process of creation is seen as a series of emanations from the cosmic mind. And sometimes these emanations are personalized in terms of succeeding generations of gods. You see that in Indian and in Greek religion, and in Christianity and Judaism, you see it in terms of a hierarchy of different types of angels. And these are the emanations, and the higher emanations come first. They work down, they work down. The higher emanations help in the creation of the lower ones. And at the very lowest level, the material world that we experience is woven together. So, in addition to all these emanations, there are some which become embodied, and that's us. Because in the broader history of the cosmos, human beings are embodied for a while, and then after our material bodies die, our we continue in a disembodied state.
Yes, as the adage goes, we are spiritual beings temporarily inhabiting physical
Yes,
bodies.
yes, yes.
Yeah.
So on this account, there are really three different types of beings in the universe. There are the unembodied beings, which are the gods and the angels. There are the embodied beings, which is us while we're on the earth, and then there are the disembodied beings, which are that's what we are when we're dead.
Is this what you mean when you speak of the three bodies, mineral, vegetable, animal, or is that
No,
separate? That's separate.
that's something slightly different.
Yes. Okay.
But in this mind before matter
Yes.
account of the universe, eventually all human beings, their physical bodies will dissolve. In fact, the whole material universe will dissolve, and then what will be left will be mind again, except that it will be slightly different because of what humans have achieved while they were embodied.
And the radical nature of this mind before matter perspective like it took me a while, Mark, to sort of I'm not sure I fully appreciate it even now, but to bring us up to the present for just a moment, we live in a scientific paradigm right now, we humans, certainly in the West, in which matter is elevated over mind. Is that a fair observation?
I think that's very fair. That's absolutely accurate. And the thing is, it is hard for us to fully appreciate idealism because we have all been conditioned by materialism.
Yes.
You know, it would seem to be obvious to most people if you say what's more real, physical object or an idea, an object in the mind. It seems obvious that the physical object is more real, but that is the reverse of what everyone believed without question until the end of the 17th century, when people like Newton came along and these early scientists discover that if you focus on the object and you try to be objective about it by screening out everything that's subjective, then you can discover very remarkable things about the way the material world works. And Newton and Boyle and Hooke and the scientists who followed in their footsteps.
Oppenheimer,
exactly. They did discover wonderful, extraordinary things about the way the physical world works, and they transformed human lives. Our lives are so much safer and more comfortable and in many respects so much happier than they were before the scientific and industrial revolutions. And only an idiot would deny that. But it's come at a cost. And I think the cost is that we find idealism hard to understand. And I think it's giving us a very distorted account of the human condition. And these two are very different universes. In the universe of idealism, there is a vast ocean of mind, and in it there's a very tiny, temporary little island of matter, which is just a blip, really. It will be dissolved, and then we'll be back in the ocean of mind. In the materialist, or sometimes called the physicalist account, the universe is a vast ocean of matter, and there's just a tiny little temporary island of mind in it, which is a fluke, which has come about in an extremely unlikely way. It has evolved out of a warm organic soup in a planet which just happens to be the right distance away from its sun to make this possible. And those are very different universes, and you might expect that living in one, which is drenched in mind and alive, and another which is dead, and which is really a matter of atoms bumping into each other like billiard balls, a combination of chance and the laws of physics. You might expect that living in those different universes would be very different experiences. You might think that if you were brought up in the universe of materialism and suddenly parachuted into the universe of idealism, you would think, wow, this is weird. You'd probably think that you'd like one of the candidates for initiation in the mystery schools unwittingly ingested a psychoactive drug, because it would be very different. And how would it be different? Well, I think there are different types of ways it's different. Take, for example, the extraordinary phenomena that happened at Fatima in Portugal in 1917. There were three shepherd children who had a series of visions of angels and what they called the Queen of Heaven. And the Queen of Heaven told them to tell everyone that on a particular day, at a particular time, there would be a miracle that everyone could see. And so the children did that. And on that particular day, according to different local news reports, somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 people turned up in the fields. And at the time, the children said, all those people, including several academics from the local university, saw this extraordinary thing. Now, you might think that, well, it's perfectly possible for clouds on a random day might suddenly move into a shape which looked a bit like the Queen of Heaven, and lots of people saw it. But what really makes this provocative is the prediction of time and place. There was an element of intention there. Now, I think that's quite interesting, and I think it challenges the materialist account. But what's more interesting to me are what I think what I sometimes call the mysticism of everyday life. Because I think that if we're awake to them, if we pay attention, there are things we all experience all the time which are consistent with idealism and are inconsistent with materialism.
Yeah, what Carl Jung called synchronicity.
That's a very good example. Yes, yes. In synchronicity, I'm sure you know better than I do, events which seem to have no causal connection happen next to each other in a way in which the universe, it seems as if the universe is trying to tell us something.
Yes, yeah. Seemingly random coincidences,
yes,
which is the objective materialist, shall we say, term for such things, yes, are perhaps actually not random or coincidental at all. That it is the mind-drenched, I love that phrase you used, mind-drenched universe speaking not just to us, but with us in dialogue. And
yes,
it's our job to open ourselves up to the conversation.
Yes. Well, if you put yourself into the mind of someone on his way to the mystery school to be initiated, for example, to that person, everything around him that he encountered was alive. Everything had meaning, even the smallest thing. The might be the shape of the cloud, the wind in the trees, to use a biblical phrase, a sparrow falling out of the sky.
Yes.
Everything symbolized something. Everything was a matter of the universe telling him or her something. It was a universe not only drenched in mind, but drenched in meaning. Everything that happened had several different layers of meaning. If he saw an owl in the tree, that wasn't just a symbol of the goddess Athena, goddess of wisdom. That was Athena.
Yeah.
Poking her finger into the material world and saying, pay attention.
To use your word of a few moments ago, an emanation.
Yes.
I
Yes.
love that
Yes.
word. I hadn't thought of that word, emanation. Yeah. So, Mark, to summarize so far, what you're suggesting in The Secret History of the World is that for most of Team Human Homo sapiens experience, tell me if I get this wrong, we move through a world in which a mind over matter universe until about 500 years ago, give or take.
Yeah.
When matter objective materialism began to supplant and push to the margins this more mind-drenched, idealistic flow through the world. Am I getting that right?
It began, but it was quite slow actually, because in the 19th century, on both sides of the Atlantic, people were by and large still very religious, and no doubt there were, we know it was being questioned in the intelligentsia. So I think it's really only in the 1950s and 60s that we reached the time of kind of the densest, darkest materials. And that is, we've reached a stage now where spiritual experiences and intuitions and ideas are open to mockery, and some of our most heartfelt experiences and feelings are delusional, if you really look at them in terms of materialism. So that if we meet someone and decide that's the person I am meant to be with, if I say that to myself, I'm kidding myself. I'm not meant to be with anyone. Life isn't meaningful in that sense.
You're deluding yourself,
Yeah.
From an objective, scientific, materialist perspective, that's absurd, Mark.
Yeah, it is absurd.
They would say, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're giving us a little bit of hope here, because you're suggesting that this kind of the monopoly, shall we say, of objective materialist science has actually not been with us for that long.
Well, yeah, I think the good news is I don't think it will be. I don't think it'll be with us for much longer.
Well, let's talk about that. Yeah, because let's get into the quantum realm for a moment.
Yeah. Well, I think that there are two things I'd like to say. I mean, the first is that when campaigning atheists beat us about the head, beat spiritual people about the head with science, they're using classical science. The new science is much more friendly towards spirituality.
The new science.
Yeah.
By which you mean?
Yeah. Relativity, quantum mechanics, everything. Well, the science that's grown up in the 20th century and in the 21st century has had an extraordinary boost from artificial intelligence, because scientists are looking at the way that artificial intelligence works, and they're seeing in that new ways of understanding physical processes. And so to many cutting edge scientists, it seems that the universe may be intelligent in a way which is a bit like the way that artificial intelligence is intelligent. And that's interesting because artificial intelligence is modeled on our own intelligence.
I love those synergies there. So we're talking about sort of the emergence of what some call quantum physics. This is Niels Bohr, Max Planck, Werner Heisenberg, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that light is both a wave and a particle, and as soon as you try and pin it down, you can't. And most famously Albert Einstein, of course, probably.
Yeah, well, all those guys were really curious, widely read people. They were deeply immersed in the study of religion, including esoteric religion, and because they were finding that the old models of thought just didn't really work if you tried to apply them to the weird things they were discovering. So in fact, I mean, something I am writing about in my new book is the way that they took models from esoteric philosophy, which, as I say, is the kind of equivalent to theoretical physics in idealism, and use them as ways to understand these really strange new phenomena that they were discovering. And they were discovering that the old ideal of objectivity, it just wasn't possible to hold to that anymore. And one of the major discoveries of quantum mechanics was whatever we look at, we change.
Yes. Yeah.
So
the participatory observer.
Yes. And John Wheeler, the great physicist who was Richard Feynman's mentor, used that word in his hypothesis was what he called the participatory universe.
Yeah.
And his idea was that although we can't, if I look at this coffee mug, I can't see that I'm changing it. It must be a very small change. But what John Wheeler is saying is that if you take all the observations that all humans have made since they have evolved, there might have been a cumulative effect, and therefore we might have helped mold the universe into the shape we now see. And that's a very esoteric idea, because what they're talking about is, well, we're all very familiar with these days with the idea of that we live in psychosomatic bodies. But if I'm embarrassed, I'll blush. That's a shallow change.
Yeah.
If I have very bad attitudes over a long period, that might make me ill. Well, what the newer science is saying, what the newer science is saying, is that we live in a psychosomatic universe, and that entirely fits in with the philosophy of idealism as it was taught in the mystery schools.
Yes, that mind precedes matter, not the opposite.
Yes.
And that we actually influence the course of events, influence the unfolding nature of the universe via the power of our individual and collective, as the French might say, mentalité.
Yes. And also because we have emanated from God. We are emanations from God. Part of us is an emanation from God. We can interact with God if we can go back and find that wardrobe door in the back of our minds.
Is that a C.S.
We could,
Lewis reference?
yes.
Yes,
then,
yes.
you know, then there are other ways in which we can, beyond just casual observation, in which we can affect the world.
Well, and I love your reference there to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Certainly C.S. Lewis, I think, as a philosopher and an author, writer, was very aware.
Yes, he was. Well, yes. Well, one of his closest friends was was a writer called Owen Barfield, and Owen Barfield was a senior member of Anthroposophy, which is the mystical school started by Rudolf Steiner.
Yes.
And I think that those Narnia novels are full of Rudolf Steiner ideas, and all the better for it.
Well, yes, and you look at all of the popular series, you know, the books we grew up reading as kids, you know, most recently the global phenomenon that was the Harry Potter series. I mean, these are shot through with esoterica and mind over matter paradigms. I mean, J.K. Rowling, you know, tapped into that beautifully. And, you know, and it's so funny because most kids who read them have no idea of anything we're speaking of here. They just know that these books and characters speak to them.
Yes.
At the level of the unconscious. It's so powerful.
Yes. Well, you know, in some very important sense, they're true.
Yes.
They tell us important things about life.
Yes. Yeah. So you anticipated my next question, and I know we just have a few minutes left here, but you pointed to the anthroposophical school. Are there, can you speak to mystery schools today? Are they with us, mysterious or not? I know, for example, some see Steiner as a modern day mystery school practitioner. Some see Jung that way. What's your take?
Yes, well, I think they are both certainly very good. They're both very good examples. I know a little story about a group of very senior English Freemasons. Freemasonry has always prided itself on being a kind of outgrowth of Rosicrucianism. It believes it has a Rosicrucian stream running through it.
Interesting.
And in the original kind of myth of Christian Rosenkreuz, he is German, so they traveled to Germany because they wanted to find the true occult roots of Freemason. They wanted to find the real deal. And they went to several places, and they met several people, and they were pretty unimpressed. And then they went to one town in Germany, and this guy rose up off the ground and talked to them from midair.
Wow.
And these were very grand English gentlemen. You could imagine what lots of Freemasons are like in London, affiliated to the royal family and all that.
Yes.
And they thought they probably had found, you know, somebody who had genuine occult powers, but they weren't very impressed with him because they thought he was rather working class, rather common, as they would have said.
Well, I was just wondering. You go ahead. Yeah.
And that person was Rudolf Steiner.
Oh, come on. I love that. So these grand English gentlemen witnessed Steiner's levitating, but dismissed him as a peasant. Wow, that's amazing. Well, so God, we've covered so much ground. Can you give Team Human a little bit of wisdom, Mark, about how here in the early 21st century, we might somehow integrate the mind and matter. I mean, I think COVID, if it's taught us nothing, it's that
Yes,
many of us are swayed, shall we say, I'll say this as apolitically as I can, by the power of the material and the
yes,
reductionist and the
yes.
scientific. I mean, certainly, without belaboring it, what what wisdom can you give us as humans for navigating this mind matter relationship now?
Well, can I just preface by
Please.
saying that I said earlier that I would you brought up the subject of the kind of the esoteric account of how a human being is made up, what a human
Yes,
being consists of, and
please.
I just want to address
Yes,
that.
please.
In the materialist account of human beings, what we generally think today is that we have a material body and we have a material side and a mental side. Up until the year 666 AD, everyone believed something slightly different. Everyone believed that we have three bodies. And so we have a material body, which you might say is made of dead matter. And then we have something which is sometimes called the life body or the etheric body. And the life body is what gives all these molecules shape, which makes them into systems and makes them, in a sense, alive.
Mm.
And that body is also sometimes, therefore, called the vegetative body, because it's the body that makes us alive in the same way that plants are alive. And then we have another body. It's also sometimes called the soul. And then there is another body, which nestles inside the etheric body and is sometimes called the astral body. Now, the astral body is what gives us a consciousness which is akin to the consciousness of animals. I don't think I need to explain that. And then inside, there is another element which is nestling inside the astral body, is a spark of God, a spark of the divine. Now, the powers and abilities which were taught by the mystery schools and the secret societies involve manipulating these different bodies, having a working knowledge of how they interact, and doing good things with them for the benefit of the world and in order to become more spiritual. And when human beings, when in the Christian doctrine of the fall, we tend to think of that as a fall into sin. In fact, first of all, it's a fall into matter. I described earlier how human beings are a sort of emanation from God, and they fell into matter. And as they fell into matter, matter became more and more dense. Matter wasn't always as dense as it is now. In the stories of myths and legends and the early passages in the Bible, beings, monsters can morph because matter wasn't as dense as it is now. And as the earth became denser, so too did human beings, and the physical material part of their makeup became more dense, and particularly the skull. So our consciousness is, in a sense, inside this material body. It's not completely, but just bear with this for a moment. It's inside the body. And the reason for this, the reason why this was meant to be, is so that we can no longer have complete, unfettered access to God and the gods and the higher angels. Because if we knew every moment of our waking lives what God wanted us to do, we would never have developed the unique faculties which we bring to the universe. And these include free will and the ability to think in an abstract and conceptual way. I don't believe that angels, for example, have that. When angels give somebody an important vision, it's normally tremendously richly symbolic. It's not normally expressed in conceptual terms. I think this is something new we are bringing to the universe, and we are meant to do that. So, in answer to your question earlier, we are meant to be in this period of the deepest materialism, to develop these faculties, which we can then go on to apply in spiritual realms. Now, in answer to your last question, for the most part, we don't have access to higher realms because our material bodies cut us off or filter a lot out. But in esoteric tradition, there are some circumstances in which our soul partially leaves our material body, carrying the spirit and the spark of divinity with it. And one of these times is when we're sleeping. Sometimes you hear of people have an experience of floating up to the ceiling. I think that's something else. That's something more extreme. That's something that may happen to people rarely in life when they may have perhaps a tremendously important vision or a vision of death, for example. They may be dying. That's quite dangerous. But every night for all of us, our soul and our spirit come partially out of our bodies.
Yes. And go ahead.
Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, and we know that physically, while we're sleeping, our bodies are actually they kind of lock up a little bit.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's almost as if our self is kind of holding the body still.
Right.
So that our spiritual body, let's say, can kind of do its thing. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, that I think that ties in very nicely. So when we are asleep, because our soul and spirit are partially out of the body, that means that angels, spirits, gods can talk to us without the filter. And so you asked me to recommend practices.
Yes.
Practical things you can do. I think that when you wake up, I do this every morning. When I wake up, I lie there completely still for a while and see what is in my mind, because I think what is there may well have been put there by angels. I think if angels and higher beings are trying to tell us something, they may well use that method. And I actually write in that way. I often find I wake up in the morning and I've been thinking about a problem, a way to express a difficult idea, and it will be there. It will be there very, very clearly.
Same.
You do the same, yeah.
I do,
yeah.
and I know so many songwriters and writers and artists who, yeah, are very, very conscious about capturing that early morning or that dream state meditation.
Yes. I think it's a sacred thing. Yeah.
Well, I'd never thought of it quite in the way that you put it here, Mark, but that's so beautiful and powerful. And I'm guessing a number of our listeners, our viewers, will maybe nodding their heads at this point, because I think.
Well, I think it's interesting because it's an esoteric explanation of an experience we all have, which materialism doesn't really give a good explanation for.
Yeah. Wow. Well, and to this last question of what can we take away, what's actionable? It seems like from, a close reading of your book, The Secret History of the World, whatever we can do, however we can be more aware of the power of mind with a capital M, whether it's through what the protocol you just described early in the morning, or becoming more conscious and strategic about our breathing, or using, for lack of a better term, mind bending or mind altering substances in a thoughtful and strategic way. I'm thinking of plant medicine, for example. I'm thinking of the 2,000 plus year old yogic tradition of activating the chakras through conscious and strategic breathing and postures to kind of move, from a scientific point of view, move the cerebral spinal fluid up the body towards the crown of the head to sort of turn us into a bit more of a receiver or an antenna.
Yeah, I think that those breathing exercises can also help the soul and spirit to leave the body. That's some are intended to do that.
Yeah, and then I think of all of the accounts of near-death experiences, the so-called NDEs, near-death experiences, and that again, I think, is an extreme example of what you're describing. However, I think it pulls back the curtain, perhaps, on this mind over matter scenario that you've laid out so beautifully here.
Can I give just one little last hint?
Yes, please.
Which was told to me by an Irish mystic who
is this Lorna?
Lorna, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, who sees angels all the time. I mean, she has a very different form of consciousness. And she told me that, well, she says we all have a guardian angel. I mean, she would agree with the esoteric account of the human body I outlined. She would say another element is we all have a guardian angel just behind us. And something she told me, which I have used, and I think it works, and I would ask viewers to try it out, is if you're going to a meeting and you think it's going to be a difficult one, and you worry that the person you're going to meet is going to have a closed mind and is not going to want to meet you halfway, then ask your guardian angel to talk to that person's guardian angel.
Wow.
To smooth the way.
Wow.
And I sometimes do that, and I think it works.
Wow. Yeah. I have nothing to add there. That's a powerful mind protocol. Well, last question, Mark. This is so wonderful. Can you hint? You hinted a few minutes ago at it. Can you hint just a little bit at your new project without giving away the goods?
Yes. Well, I'm working on a new book now called The Secret History of the Universe. So ramping it up a little bit, and that is going to involve Niels Bohr and Robert Oppenheimer and particularly Wolfgang Pauli, who was the guy who developed synchronicity with Jung. He was an amazing guy. He had something in common with Lorna, which is that when Pauli other scientists would never let Pauli into their labs because whenever he went anywhere near electrical equipment, it would go haywire. And the same is true of Lorna.
Wow. Because of the electromagnetic energy they were emitting in some way, is that?
I don't know. I think in Lorna's case, that would be the kind of beings who surround her. Some of which I'm guessing have some kind of they certainly have a light element and therefore an electromagnetic element. So,
yes. Which reminds me very quickly, one of the most neglected aspects, I think, of our objective scientific mechanistic paradigm is the complete ignoring of electricity, of electromagnetic energy, right down to the cellular level. I mean, we know that cells of our bodies communicate via electrical impulses. There's so little shrift given to that.
Yes.
And the quantum physicists are bringing back, I think, what the mystics, as you detail so beautifully in your book, have known for a very, very long time, that we are exchanging energy. We are beings of frequency, we humans, and we are exchanging energy with the rest of living and breathing creation. And to me, as a breath coach and an environmental historian, and you know, on my own sort of spiritual journey, as we all are, that really resonated for me, Mark, in reading your book and in this conversation today. There is so much beautiful mystery right in front of us.
Well, I think it's been a wonderful conversation, and thank you for leading it in such a kind of deft and illuminating way.
Well, thank you for being willing to have the conversation, and we must have you on again once your new book is finished and out, and I look forward to part two.
I'd really like that.
That would be
great.
Thank
you very much, Ron.
Yes, Mark, thank you so much. Thanks to our listeners and viewers here at The Great Relearning, and looking forward to hearing again from Mark Booth very soon. Welcome, everybody, to The Great Relearning Room with the Baldwin brothers. We have Ian and Philip and Michael. I'm your host, Dr. Rob Williams, and we are discussing here today Mark Booth's book, The Secret History of the World. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
So this is our third conversation, Jeremy Lent being our first and Bering being our second.
Right.
So what do we make of Booth?
Okay, brothers, who's leading off?
Be perky.
It's this leading off business that I think causes us to freak out. All right, I'll just throw out, I had not known and or had forgotten, whatever, that the reasoning behind the mystery schools becoming secret, they were obliged to go underground because of not Augustine, help, the Emperor.
Augustus.
Thank you very much. Of Augustus. And I hadn't realized that they were driven underground that early on.
Nor I.
I somehow tied that up as being in the 3rd or 4th century when they closed Plato's school and the Roman state started to become super nasty. So that in itself was an interesting detail, because of course this notion of these kinds of things going underground it's a long story in an ancient history, much of which is traced in Mark's book.
Yeah, it even goes back. My notes, and they're now old enough that I've forgotten them, but I had a quick scan of some of them. He talks about the mystery schools were very diverse. We all, I include myself, think of them as basically Greek.
Right.
They were universal. I think Anne Baring would say universal to lunar cultures. And the Manichaean tradition, the Iranian tradition, I recall Mark Booth saying that they also had to go underground.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
So, but the reprise of Augustus Caesar, I'd never heard of that one.
Mm.
And it makes sense they have to go underground because they're a threat to the powers, whoever they may be.
But how come they weren't a threat to the powers previously, especially when all the powers were tied up in them? All the thinkers, all the creative people apparently were tied up in these schools. Where was the problem?
The problem was, and I'm just guessing, Caesar Augustus said, enough of this republic business. We're going empire, and
Yeah.
I'm the god.
Right.
Yeah, that's what Anne said. That's what Mark said. Yeah, that's right.
And just to piggyback on, I know with the Knights Templar, that the Catholic Church marshaled its own armies in the face of what they perceived to be the threat from the Knights, and destroyed the Knights Templar with their own armies. So and arguing in that
Together with Philip II. Yeah.
What did you say, Philip?
Together with Philip II of France.
Absolutely correct.
Who was broke, and the Knights Templar were just loaded, and he needed that treasure.
He was taking on the Morgan Bank.
That's sacrilege.
Jamie Dimon better be perking up here.
Yeah. I love the used
What do you all feel about the whole, the whole mind thing again, which I got a little wrong when we were talking about Anne Baring. But anyway, the whole mind thing, the matter scientism thing, and then this, I don't know what you call it, challenge or, evolution into quantum physics, which may be, which is obviously controversial, may be the gateway back into the mind.
I think both of them feel
it's so challenging, it seems to me, to the traditional scientism, point of view. And it becomes so, in a sense, esoteric. And I think that's a point of Booth's, Mark's, is that quantum physics is going to perhaps lead us out of, the matter focus, etc. Thoughts, Philip, Ian, Rob?
Well, I would just say that it isn't two things, but isn't it ironic that we would use science to come full circle back to where we maybe were before science? And who cares if that's the way we need to go to get there? That's fine. You have to ask the question, well, one is always wary of the fact that if you take, for example, Carlo Rovelli, I think he'd like to say there is only quantum physics and you don't need all that esoteric stuff. It's exciting all by itself. I hope I'm not misrepresenting him, but and that's an interesting question. So it's a possible pathway, and it's also possibly a rationalization out of the problem.
Could be.
Out of the problem for some people. Yeah.
It's funny to think that Max Planck started the whole thing 123 years ago. So quantum science, which did build up over the first 3 decades of the 20th century, is not brand new. It's not new.
No, but it's evolving still with its discoveries in an increasingly, I don't know, esoteric way or whatever you want.
Yeah, I agree.
Reaffirming, reconfirming, expanding the point of view.
The esoteric dimension of it, the spiritual implications of it, and even findings. And talks about infinite particles beyond the boson, that enmesh us all in a single organism of incomprehensible size. So I think it's very fruitful, and I agree with Philip. Gives a damn how we get there, so long as we get there.
So long as we get there.
Yeah.
Of course, I love the way I would suggest, a little bit pushes the envelope for, I'm sure, a lot of people in the way in which he brought up Fatima. And then, of course, the wonderful, which Rob brought up, of synchronicity as examples, pithy examples. And then, of course, he terminates with this whole thing, around dream and sleep and reconnecting via sleep. And then he brings up Lorna, the rather famous lady who communicates with angels and maintains each of us has a guardian angel at all times sitting at our back. And I thought, ooh,
did we like
pushing it a bit? The audience going to get a little bit, woo, we're getting into woo-woo land.
Did we like his preparing for an encounter that might not go well or might not be sympathetic?
Yes.
I get my guardian angel. Would you please negotiate with that person's guardian angel so that we can ourselves? It was good. It's good.
That was good. I was imagining, to that point, I was imagining the quantum physicists as being kind of their own somewhat secret school of initiates. It's almost like the quantum physicists over here in this kind of semi-secret huddle are kind of responding to the mechanistic reductionist scientific paradigm by trying to, your words, I think, evolve us and the whole scientific paradigm, to be Kuhnian about it, right, in a more fruitful direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, one thing I did think about is in your conversation with Mark, and I guess this keeps coming up for me, is always reminding ourselves this larger picture. So I think soon we're going to have Jeremy Narby speaking, and he'll be addressing, we're finally going into all of the indigenous stories. And of course, I believe all of those people would look at us and shake their head and say, what the hell are you all on about? What a lot of mind spinning, and so once again, less so with Anne, but very much so with Mark, this is the Western esoteric. So he says the secret history of the world, and not quite, it's the secret history of the Western world. Okay, I think Muslim and Arabic culture fits into the Western world. And of course, that's just one leg of the world story, much of which bypasses all of this stuff, which I know we're going to get into. But it's always important that we remember that we aren't self-referential in terms of our own DNA culture. And that is something I guess I find myself thinking about a great deal. And that takes us back to our first conversation around Jeremy Lent and Neo-Confucianism and so on.
Right.
Yeah, and Philip, you've always been really good at reminding us of that. And I was thinking of Lent and Neo-Confucianism as you were speaking. Yeah, we need to keep the circle of inclusivity as broad as we possibly can around the world with these conversations.
It's pretty hard because we're hardwired. We're pretty hardwired in our culture. And to make it more complicated, we've managed to put our little boot in the rest of the planet so that everybody's bought in. Nearly.
Rob or Philip, because Philip, you had a meeting with Mark. I'm really quite intrigued about his next book. And what is the title of it, Rob?
The secret history of the universe, right?
Yes, the secret history of the universe. It was tip of my brain.
The universe. Did he talk about it when you saw him, Philip? No.
He didn't want to.
Oh.
He mentioned it was happening, but that it was off the table.
For the benefit of our listeners, I would like to say that if anyone has curiosity about the mystery school, it isn't told in a linear fashion in the book. It's spread throughout all, 500 plus pages. But you learn more about what went on in a mystery school than you'll learn in any other book I've read. And I grew up fascinated by this, and the mystery was a complete mystery.
Yeah.
And in Rob's interview with him, he does a synopsis that alone is worth,
it's a doozer.
A doozer.
That was that was maybe my favorite part of the conversation.
It was
yeah.
So I think we got a very good introduction into the Western esoteric tradition. It covered actually no more than a tenth of the story, because the story goes on and on and on up to Steiner.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Steiner levitating.
Yes, that was good, wasn't it?
Wonderful.
I've never heard that one.
Yeah, that was amazing. Yeah. And Mark did mention, I think the secret history of the universe will address, among other many topics, I think the quantum.
I think that's why he's writing it.
Yeah, that's what I understood him to say.
Yeah, he alludes to it, and he's definitely kind of dancing around it a little bit because he wants to be a bit proprietary, but he did tease us a little bit, and I got excited about that idea of doing in this new book for the history of science what he's done for the mystery schools. Well, we just have a few minutes left. Any other reflections on Mark Booth?
I was very interested by his referencing this fellow Nassim Haran. Have I got that right? The physicist.
Say it again.
Nassim Haran, something to do with. I can't do it. I don't understand.
I think he's a quantum physicist who's, I don't know his name either, but he's just moved, according to Mark, to Lake Geneva.
That's right.
Somewhere around the lake.
Oh yeah.
And in his Jungian synchronistic moment, Nassim was a California neighbor of our Peak Flow CEOs, and they used to surf together.
Oh, really?
Actually, she's actually been invited to his quantum lab in California, but then he secretly, as Mark alluded, he picked up shop and left.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
That is synchronicity.
That is crazy, crazy interesting. Yeah. So maybe Mark will get into all this in his new book.
Yeah, be great. It'd be great.
But I did love Mark's description, taking us like on the journey of the initiate, and because I had been wondering, it's like, what does this look and feel like?
Yeah.
What did it feel like to be embodied and spirited in this? And I that was one of my favorite moments in the conversation.
Jeremy will have a lot to say about this, as expressed in indigenous culture and tradition, which goes back way, way, way much longer than the mystery schools.
Right.
I love that. Yeah.
I'm looking at my notes on this from way before your interview. The mystery schools, this is Booth, maybe I'm not quoting him directly, purpose was to shock initiates into a vivid awareness of the overwhelming presence and reality of spiritual beings and the transcendent reality of the spirit realm. To make an initiate aware that this life was but one of many, and memory of it was important for future incarnations. Quote, initiation involves forging a conscious working relationship with disembodied spirits and an existential knowledge of the way they work in our lives and afterlives. So that last part comes straight from the horse's mouth. So
good way to end.
A good resting place, Ian. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah.
Gentlemen, thanks to you all. Thanks to the Marion Institute, and thanks to Mark Booth and the Secret History of the World. And we look forward to his next book. And until next time.
Great. Thank you very much, Rob.
Yes, thanks for all being here.
Thank you, Rob.
Great relearning room.